There was movement at the station, for the word had passed around.
Well, may we say, God save the Queen. Because nothing will save the Governor-General.
Any boss who sacks anyone for not turning up today is a bum.
Going to an underarm. Whoever believed it. And that's a disappointing finish.
If you are so confident about your view of fight back, why won't you call an early election?
The answer is, mate, because I want to do you slowly.
Not when I was Prime Minister, but if I'd been in the Parliament when the Soviet Union ended, I would have fiercely tried to establish an independent Australian policy. I would have wanted to keep an alliance with the United States. But I would not have wanted the circumstances in which, if they go to war in the Western Pacific, it de facto represents a declaration of war for and on behalf of Australia, just as much as the declaration of the British in relation to the First World War tied Australia to a most terrible slaughterhouse in the history of mankind.
G'day, mate. Always a pleasure, of course. How you going?
Very good, buddy. Yourself?
Good. Hey, big news in Geelong was the decision by the newly elected council to reverse a decision by the previous council to not celebrate our current Australia Day, which is on January 26th. A newly constituted council has decided that they will now conduct celebrations, inverted commas for some people, and also citizenship ceremonies on that day. And it's got some support. I know Richard Marles, the Deputy Prime Minister, has said that's the government's position, that is January 26th is Australia Day. But we've had the local MP, Christine Cousins, say that she was disappointed by the decision and the lack of consultation. What are your thoughts on the decision to reverse the...
I think that it's not the council's position anyway to make that call. That's a national holiday. That's the first thing I want to say. And I get a little bit sick of seeing this all around the world where someone subverts the process and says, all right, I'm this little council in, say, Mildura, where I come from. Or today I'm at Surfers Paradise, which is why you might hear people cheering outside if it gets to the microphone. But it's not okay for some random council to just go, hey, here's what we're doing, when it's a national significance. Do you know what I mean? I mean, the councils are not even a constitutional body. It's just a delegated authority from the state, as of course you know, to give you a local flavour.
It's a local government act, so it's a delegated a type of authority. Yep, that has an act under which it operates. So yes, it doesn't have a constitutional status.
And they've come in through the back door because just because of logistics and practicality, each council will run the Australia Day festivities so that there's Australia Day festivities in each council. I mean, that's the
Correct.
policy. And
Yeah.
then, then secondly, look at Geelong. And I mean, Geelong is not the most multicultural of places. It's a very Irish, Scottish, what people would call white. I hate referring to people as a colour. I don't
Mm.
think that's correct. We're all a bit pasty ourselves. But it's a very let's say British Isles kind of play footy, surf, ochre. Is a genuine heart there. So there's a lot of people that would be unhappy with not having Australia Day within Geelong, I'd imagine. Like,
Yeah.
and I don't mean just a little unhappy. I mean like vehemently unhappy.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah. I think
Mildura's the same.
I think you're right. I mean, the people that were elected are telling us in the media that they've consulted widely with the people that they know and they talk to, and overwhelmingly, those people want them and did want them to change the decision, and that's what they've duly done. When they've been elected, so the day has become a political question for some
Hmm.
people, and it's unfortunate because we need a day to celebrate being Australian. It's now become a day where some people want to celebrate being Australian on that day, and others feel a little bit self-conscious celebrating being Australian on that day. So we've got a situation, unfortunately, I think, that needs
Well,
resolution.
I have a bit of a take on it. I'm not sure if I've ever shared it. But if you recall the wars that Howard had back in the 90s to not teach Australian history properly, to not really discuss a lot of it,
Yeah,
and they attacked each other over the curriculum. It became all too hard. So now, like I know from my children, they don't even know who Burke and Wills are. They only know about Major Mitchell because of the writing I've done and actually showing them places. They don't know our history very well. So what that means is that these and in my opinion, I'm going to be out there. They're bad actors. Anyone calling Australia Day Invasion Day is a bad actor. Why? Because that's not reality. It was not Invasion Day. Anyone that is learned on the topic was read anything about, say, the original journals. I could go to a lot of stories, but my favourite one is that were it not for the local Indigenous people sharing fishing tackle, teaching them how to fish, helping them gather food in the opening year of that colony, they all would have died. That because there was a shipwreck of one of the supply ships and blah blah blah. This is a fact. Now you didn't. I've never heard of an invasion where those being invaded help the other one survive. Do you know what I mean? And these are
yeah.
stories that
There
really
was.
speak to what makes.
Yeah, my understanding is there was that cooperation, and many
Yeah.
of the first settlers became friends and were quite reliant
Yep.
on the local indigenous population for their own survival and to understand how this place works.
Yeah.
So that narrative
And
is to be really looked at, I think, a little bit more closely.
yeah. And we have to sort of dedicate probably a whole topic to it to
Yeah,
really get into it. But just on what you said there, what I said before, and one more story. I think it was under Arthur Phillip, the first governor.
yeah,
Someone had stolen tackle. This is written in one of the journals. I'm not sure if it was uh, Wedge, but it's one of the journals. Initial like first year journals, right? And
yeah,
they'd caught this guy stealing tackle, invited the local elders and the local people to witness British authority and rule of law, and they
mm,
were giving this guy lashes, man, whack, 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 lashing the F out of him, right?
yeah,
That was his penalty. And the story is the Aboriginal or the Indigenous tribe, whether it was the Urawa, whoever it was, turned their backs on the governor,
yeah,
hissed at the governor, and were extremely upset because in their eyes the guy had done nothing wrong. He'd taken fishing tackle, the fishing tackle's back, and what they saw was a brutal, what they felt was too brutal, like it was outside of their acceptance for that penalty. Mind you, there's some brutal penalties that Indigenous people had, but this particular one was not. It was not on for them. So if you look at those stories, it's not an invasion. And it means that people don't understand how the country was settled, and they don't understand where the genocide happened and how it happened. And they don't know the basics of the laws involved, who broke what law, who was the evil doer, who were the good guys, who were trying their best, which indigenous tribes were fighting, which ones were helping to fight the other indigenous tribes. There was a whole story there, and because these bad actors, and we know who they are, right? They rabble rouse. They call them race hucksters in America, and now you got people going invasion. Australia was invaded. Australia's a very big place, So if you're living in, for example, Barkindji, northwest Victoria, no one touched that place until 1830, 1836, 1842, and they completely genocided the place, right? So, and there's whole stories there, but there's parts of, Western Australia that weren't touched for many years later. So to say, hey, Invasion Day, it's really this reconstituted view of what Indigenous people are, and it's usually with people that, they sip lattes, they drive a Range Rover, and then they identify as Aboriginal, and they get very upset, and they completely alienate other groups who have a very different idea of things. Many Indigenous people are behind Australia Day. It's the country's day, you know? It's the country's day. And to sort of tie a bow in it, what I'm really trying to get at is I blame Howard and the piss weak people in the other side. No, here's what actually happened on day one, on day three. You know what? It took a turn around 2 years later. By 10 years later, there's more people coming in, and we had murder left, right, and centre. And then before you knew it, there's land rushes, and then these poor people were just butchered. So tell the truth,
Yeah.
and then you can't have kids getting manipulated.
There's a lot of atrocities committed, right? There's no doubt whatsoever
Oh yeah,
that it happened.
oh yeah,
And there were groups of them that would go out
horrific.
weekends to do these sorts of these killings, right? And they're
Yeah,
all over the place, and that's part of what our history is. In
that's
fact,
right,
because
and it's not discussed.
no, and because it was so effective, um, many of them obviously didn't survive to push back against what eventually happened, which was more white people and other colonialists coming to Australia and taking their share of what was previously their land. So here we are.
And I've got a take on that. I'll show you when it's done.
Yeah, I think.
There's
Look,
a paradox in there.
I think there were some really well-meaning and intentioned people, and then there were a whole lot of greedy, determined
Yeah,
colonials that
yeah,
to make sure they got.
and that's that's the heart of the paradox. If you get do-gooders and liberals and Whigs in there, and they have this idealistic view, and they want to help, and everybody should live in harmony, there are evil people that have no problem murdering to get ahead, and in
Mm,
those days they very much did. And it's almost as if, as I read, and I might be biased, I could have a very serious bias, but as I read and write about that period, I see that those animal spirits are unshackled. And previously, the exclusivists, which we would call Tories, who were rich people, who owned a lot of capital, who treated everybody like servants, right? Everybody. So
yeah,
weren't necessarily racist because they had Aboriginal people that were very close to them.
yeah,
See? Because they served a purpose, I guess,
mm,
or they used them against their own enemies. So now, when you take away these powerful, think like a Kerry Packer, right? This is what I'm saying. Like, think like a Kerry Packer figure, a Murdoch figure, who are derided by the left, yeah? But these guys have an iron tight will that controls people. And once you remove that, this is the idea anyway. Once you remove that and you replace it with do-gooders, oh, now the gangsters come in, right? And there ain't no big man to stop them here. They're coming in family by family, and some of them, like for example, I bet you none of these activists would have heard of the Mayo massacre. They wouldn't have heard of that, right? They wouldn't really know who Pemulwuy was, who was an original warrior. But there's the battling. They want to know about invasion. Who are the warriors then? They probably don't know it. Do they know that, like a lot of these battles and massacres, were done because of provocations of settlers. So whether that's shooting at people, taking a woman without, paying for it, basically, or hurting people, or that sort of thing, like
or
um,
moving
uh,
things in sacred sites that they know to be
sacred sites.
places of significance, where it would cause a reaction, right?
Yeah,
Mm. Well,
and
that's.
and most of
I was just going to say
I
that's
just
look.
wanted to,
It's a question for the federal government, which I don't think the Labor federal government's going to touch. But perhaps
no,
if things change after the election, perhaps it is something that will either be changed or stay the same. I'm not sure, but I think the political since the referendum, touching anything Indigenous isn't a vote winner anymore, and I don't think it will be for probably 20 years. So Dutton clearly has he's picking the right political wins by focusing on the flag, focusing on what it means to be Australian, and now he's almost
mm,
reversed the narrative by saying, by talking about this stuff and even having Indigenous flags around, can you believe it? It's divisive, but there it is.
yeah, and
His
and and and
narrative,
we can
and
jump
it's
to that a bit more national
getting.
story. I had to make a story, a 60-second story to apologise to Dutton, because I had that take, like, he's clearly going down the racist route. He did it before with African gangs, and that destroyed the entire party. We'll see what happens. Blah blah. That was the general view I had, and then I heard him on Channel 7. And did you catch that, Channel 7?
Yeah, a
Straight
little
out
bit.
of CNN, these idiots. Oh my god. She's going, oh, so you're going to put the flag up the top? Well, it's a matter for the states. Yeah, but are you going to flag? Look, I respect. He basically said, I really respect the Aboriginal flag, the Aboriginal people, but it's not our national flag. Correct. I'm interested in practical reconciliation. I want the kids in Alice Springs to have good education,
Well,
healthcare outcome, blah blah blah. And
I
she just says, "Yeah, sure, but are you going to put the flag?" You know, she blew past the actual issue we have in this country, and that's the thing, right? The issue is we've got children here that are behind Africa in terms of their poverty levels and their education levels and their life expectancy,
yeah,
and they're sitting on top of a district that's making billions from mining. So
yeah,
someone's pulling billions out from mining. These people are not being looked after properly. You've got a local population which people will call racist. I wouldn't. I'd say like envious maybe, or doing it tough for themselves and taking it out on others.
yeah,
And I think that's always been the case in my experience when called a wog as a kid. It was always poor families, that would have a go at you because there's that saying, no one hates a migrant. I'll change it, but it's no one hates a migrant. No, no white. Let's just say no racist with a nickel hates a migrant more than the one that has a dime. The guy that got 5 cents, he's going to hate the migrant that's making that little bit more money than them. And I think there's something there. But when he said that, I just went, "Whoa, wait, are you serious?" I don't know. We can be cynical and say he's not serious, but that's the conversation. I've been to those places. And I've seen the level of racism there is unbelievable. Like it's their country, literally, and there's people coming in there and going, "Look at this scum," you know, like, well, it's not your place, mate. You stopped here to wash your clothes and put fuel in the car, so shut up. I've literally had that conversation with people, and they're lovely kids. They're lovely kids. I remember one group of teenagers. There was about 10 of them, right? Because there's a lot of kids in this area. And I walked past and I said, "Oh, excuse me, kids, can I get past?" And they've been smiling because I showed them like some common courtesy. Because you just like, get out of the way, like, whatever word you want to use.
yeah.
That's
No,
how they get treated there.
not good.
And that's what we should be focusing on. How is so much money ripped off? How the hell can so many billions of dollars not have an impact? Why don't we audit these people and find out who is like running these NGOs and why is this happening? How is it that a place like Alice Springs has nowhere for the kids to go when they're getting abused? It's a very full on thing, and then that's all smoke screened, and we'll talk about the flag. We won't talk about mining companies or or our economics at
Just,
all, we'll talk about the flag.
but just the point around the flag. Yes, our national flag is the Australian flag, but the Aboriginal flag and the Torres Strait Islander flags are Australian flags, and
Yeah.
they are recognised as Australian flags, and they can be flown as Australian flags. They're not a national flag, but they're an Australian flag. So they still fall under a banner of the nation, or a flag of the nation. It's just not our national flag. So we have state-based
So he's
flags.
being cheeky. So what you're saying he's being a bit cheeky, like he's
Yeah, I
being
think so.
semantical,
I
rhetoric.
think being yeah. Well,
It's still a national flag.
it's still an Australian flag. It's just not our national flag. It's not our nation's flag. It doesn't represent the. But those flags are Australian flags. So we have state-based flags. We even have a flag for King Charles, the King of Australia. So we've got a King of Australia flag. So when Charles is here, he flies the King of Australia flag off the front of his car. Yeah, and we also have flags for each state. We have flags for each of the governors of each state. So I don't know if you recall this, but every time
I don't know all this. No, I don't know all
every time
this.
I
This
go to
is
the tennis
news to
to
me.
watch the tennis, I look up and I look at the governor's house, and when the governor's in, the flag's flying, and it's the governor's flag. So there's all these Australian flags, but they represent different groups
So,
of people.
it's a proxy, right? It's some proxy. It's really a proxy. I mean,
I think he's using
let's
the
have a
flag.
let's have an argument as a country where we get really racist, um, because I can tell you it's
I'm
right there.
yeah, look, unfortunately, off the back of what happened with the Constitution, this is the sort of this is the sort of politics that can win votes, and that's
Of
what's
course,
happening. Hey,
I,
let's
I
move
think
to our next topic, which is Mr. Tim Pallas, a very prominent treasurer of long.
agreed.
I think one of the longest standing, second longest, I think, I think the longest standing treasurer the state has ever seen. He was there right from when Dan Andrews first became premier, and he's decided
Yeah.
today, well, at least this week, sorry, to resign. Thoughts on Tim Pallas's management of the state of Victoria from a treasury economic perspective?
I think that one of the great things with Tim Pallas and was he under Brax as well? Who was the treasurer? I can't remember who the treasurer under Brax was.
Tim was Brax's one of Brax's advisors.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So
And what I really like about the way that Victoria's run is after Kane and all that debacle, and I only learned as a kid, and teachers were saying their checks were bouncing and stuff, which is wild. Then you see Kennett come through and really uh, gain a lot of efficiency, cut a lot of stuff up. Not everybody's a fan of it. I personally am because I grew up in a town that had 5 schools and each of them had 20 kids, and he just said no one, cut all of them, and there was protests too, believe it or not. So then in comes Brax.
he did close a lot of schools, and he also amalgamated a lot of councils as well. Remember, that's
Yeah,
they were
which
his
is
two
good.
big moves, right? Well, again, in
Yeah.
the national efficiency, um, yeah, he
Well,
did.
Mildura had a council for every town in the district, right? And some of those towns had 1,000 people in them. So they just got rid of all of them, put it to one big Mildura City Council, and maybe it's a bit too big. Yeah, it costs too much. Rates are too high, and it's a little bit too whatever. But again, it's a better system than having 7 of them. You know.
There was this.
But anyway, I don't not so much about Kennett, but like once Brax got in, they maintain that same fiscal austerity, not austerity, but you know what I mean, responsibility, aim
Correct.
to balance the budgets and everything else. And you're seeing that come through. And for Tim Pallas to put not stamp duty, but to put land tax, say it's going to be temporary to fix the budget from COVID and get rid of some of the debt. I think that's fantastic. That's exactly what I like to see because it's not politically
Motive.
palatable, and you're hitting the more affluent of society, which know how to hit back, right?
Yeah.
It's not like the thing with the poorer plus don't know how to hit back. They just have a beer, they relax at home, and they whinge to each other. But the more affluent, they do know how to sort of push those levers, and so there's definitely been pushback, but the federal system worked well during COVID, but it left the states with the debt. And now the federal government's got its own problems, so forget them, not going to bail anybody out. So,
No,
they've
look,
had to do the hard things.
I think the state's looking around what it can sell, right? So it's a big debt. It's hard. It's going to be hard to manage. Look, my view is state and government debt is there's good in very simple terms. There's good state debt and bad state debt. Now, good state debt is where you're going into debt um, to create infrastructure, because infrastructure is more likely to then create efficiency and therefore improve the economy, right? If you create a bigger pie, you collect more income and you can service debt, right? So in a sense,
Yeah,
debt like that is good debt because it's investment debt, but debt that's obtained to simply pay, like was done during COVID, is
yeah,
dangerous, because there was a whole heap of money now that's sitting in people's accounts even now that hasn't been spent, and uh, unfortunately, from my understanding, is it did start to get spent, and it caused a big inflationary issue, and hence we've got a situation here where people are still spending because they've got it, even potentially from the COVID period, which has caused our economy and certainly the price of housing to just skyrocket, because that money then was
oh
thrown.
yeah,
A lot of it was thrown into the housing market. So the very thing you thought couldn't happen during COVID did happen. Prices went up. We don't have an economy functioning, but we have houses going up in value because all this money was being given to people. And the state now has borne that debt. How do we pay that debt back? Well, we have. There's a sense in which you've got to cut services, and who does that affect? Well, poor people more so than anyone, and then um,
yeah.
services like healthcare
Which means more racism. That
potentially.
means more anti-migrant, anti. It's just a fact of they graph it actually. Varoufakis, the economist, he would show graphs, and there'd be a line, a correlation between difficult economic conditions and increases in
Oh,
the more nasty sides of what people call right wing, but it isn't right wing. It's racism, anti-migrant feeling can be left or right. It's not really one or the other. I mean, unions don't particularly like migrant workers. You know, like, so there is this sort of demonization going on. I remember, and it's going to be bad because I spoke to this girl in back in Montana. She was just shopkeeping something, I can't remember, and she was openly talking about how the migrants have caused all these problems. And I said to her, "Look, I'm a little older than you, love, but I'm a bit long in the tooth, and you won't listen to a word I say, but hear what I say and think about it after. It's nothing to do with the migrants. It's to do with this mismanagement from politicians because they've been talking about this problem for 20 years, and nobody's fixed it. So now they're going to blame the migrants, like, oh." No, without the migrants, we've got bigger problems because we're in a GDP per capita recession. So if we didn't have the migrants, we'd be in an actual recession. You know, who
correct,
knows what would happen from that?
correct.
So
So we're in a debt situation, which I don't really see us getting out of, because there is no plan to get us out of it as yet. So there's some fiscal
what's the
measures.
value of it,
Oh, it's a good question. I think it's
roughly?
Victorian state debt. Wait a second. Uh, 156 billion,
Jesus, and what's our revenues?
and it's going to go up to 187 billion by 2027. 28. Victorian state receipts.
Well, lucky for good old Victorian Labor, Victorian Liberal couldn't carry couldn't carry a pallet of water in a bulldozer, man. Those people, they're hopeless.
So
They're flat out holding on to Brighton.
I'm looking at taxation revenue, but it's just taking its time. But it's
I'll never forget that one. That was like African gangs, African gangs,
where are
and
we?
even Brighton nearly dropped. Hawthorn dropped from memory. Hawthorn went to Labor. Brighton almost went to Labor, and the Labor kid was like literally 19.
Yeah, so it's 40. I think it's around 41 billion is our total tax revenue.
Oh, 40 billion.
Mm.
Yeah. But what's our surplus? We don't have one.
Yeah.
So we can't pay it off if we don't have a, look, we need to have a boom, basically. We've had a prolonged period of no growth, and it goes before the GFC because I used to watch it and track it, and I remember very clearly that Victoria was like 0.91% growth, and the whole country's growth was coming out of WA
Look, if I'm
and
reading it right,
Queensland mining.
if I'm reading it right, it's 41 billion, but that would make sense to me. That is around that, but
Well, I saw stats today saying 75 billion a year goes to tax concessions on negative gearing,
yeah,
an
but that's
additional
federal. That's at a federal level,
50 billion. Yeah,
and
yeah, the federal.
look,
I was saying, what
that's
are you looking at?
that state government revenue figure might only be state-based taxes rather than the GST for
Oh,
Victoria.
the just allocation.
Yeah, so the GST allocation to Victoria might be another amount as well. I'd have to think about that. Mm.
Yeah. I'll just be back in a sec. Got a knock on the door.
Oh, here it is. What have I got here?
We can cut out this little bit. Are you guys going back out? All right.
There's another 20. I think there's another 20 GST revenue as well. But clearly, it's triple our total income. It's triple our total the debt per year.
Yeah,
So
they're not.
how it's sustained.
And it's all the same thing that's happening in the Western world, actually, and it's just poor economic system, neoliberal system that has delivered great results, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, early 2000s, and then completely bad results since. And unless someone actually goes, wait a minute, how can all of these countries at once, neoliberal countries, who are supposed to be rich,
Yeah.
all experiencing not enough growth to sustain their population in economic activity, and are constantly engaging in wars as well? Like, it's sort of some really, you know, people have a knowledge of this stuff. They do know what a neoliberal is, which is great. They do know that it's some sort of economic system, you know, and
Yeah.
they usually equate it to warmongering, but they haven't really joined the dots to say that this economic system is failing. So they've sort of just go, our economy is failing, right? They can be comfortable there, but it's sort of a big step to go, All right, but is the system itself failing? And then you look at other countries that are growing well that aren't neoliberal. You know?
Yeah. So from a public policy perspective, I think our last podcast I sort of started talking about population policy and the fact that we don't have one from a national level,
Yeah.
and then we can't really
Yeah.
make public policy. We can't really design much public policy because each area of responsibility is in a silo. It has no bigger reference point. So if
Yeah.
education wants to plan for the future, it really can't because it doesn't have an understanding of how big Australia is going to be. If there was clearly demarcated objectives around how big Mildura will be, for example, we want Mildura to be 60,000, 80,000. We want it to be 100,000 people in that area. Then a department, various, would have to go, okay, how's that going to happen? Where is this infrastructure going to be built? How is Mildura going to grow? And all the
Yeah.
other areas of public policy can then focus on how that's to be achieved. How big should Geelong be? Okay, it should be this. Okay, how are we going to connect people together? Transport policy. How many schools do we need? Right. How many hospitals do we need? Okay. How many people do we need to train as doctors? Right. So everything makes sense, yet we don't have one. Same with our defence. Everywhere focus attention. Perhaps this debt's not such a big problem if Victoria has a population plan and a policy, right? If we
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
if we can increase the tax revenue because we've got more people here, then maybe the debt's not an issue. But again, we don't have these bigger policy positions,
You know,
right?
but the problem I think goes is fundamental though. That to you don't hear too much talk about it. You'll hear talk about communism versus capitalism, like that's a demarcation. So like that's a reasonable conversation. No, it's not. That's like 100 years old. What are you talking about?
We've got a
The
socialist.
world's moved on.
We've got a socialist democracy. This is what we have in Australia. This is what it
Yeah,
is. Now the
yeah.
question: are we going
But
to continue
but
to have?
it's supposed to be. But I don't think that we are that. I think we're more like a neoliberal. We've been made neoliberal by Hawke, by Keating, and by successive governments,
We
where
sort of
everything
have,
is sold off.
yeah. Well,
Everything's sold off.
you know what's unfortunate is people I think take for granted a lot of the things that we do actually have, like a pharmaceutical benefits scheme, like Medicare, like superannuation,
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
like
Yeah, I agree with that. Yep.
like a minimum wage, like the award system, which helps maintain a certain decent standard of living for people employed. Um,
Yeah.
but people don't appreciate where all that comes from and how even more
Labor.
have if we didn't have compulsory voting, right?
Yeah,
Where everyone
yeah.
has a
Compulsory vote is very important.
then all of those benefits would be eroded because it's certainly not in the interests of the
Can we
would
talk
vote.
about the compulsory voting thing
Issue.
just for a bit? Just for a little bit, because as you know, I'm like a mad on the U.S. politics and culture, right? And I do this whenever I hear the question come up of compulsory voting. I do this because they're all full of shit from Tulsi Gabbard out. They go, "Oh, I don't believe that anyone who doesn't really want to vote." No, no, they control the system that way. They can suppress people. They can muck around a lot more. Whereas no government in our country can really do any more than redraw a boundary, and that's independent, which is another great thing. You're
Mm.
right. Like we often will look at problems, but don't look at what we've got that is great.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, the
that's definitely
foundation of our democracy is our compulsory voting system. If that ever gets changed, our whole democracy will completely be different. It will be
yeah.
really it would
It'll be
almost
like America
it would be like America, yeah. And there would be campaigning
suppression.
and lobbying and all of those things that they've got wads of that going on, whereas in our system, at least each person is enfranchised and encouraged, forced to vote, but it's in all of our best that happens. If that ever changed, it would really fundamentally affect Australian democracy and the flavour of our country. What's interesting is that even though Dutton is becoming quite confident about being able to get some seats off Labor, there's
He'll win.
there's a lot of rusted on
He'll
people.
win.
No, well, look, there's a lot of rusted on people that when it comes down to it, even though Labor might disappoint them, Labor has delivered for them in the past, and has delivered and is delivering for them as a result of what they've done in the past, and people know that and remember that. I think the current government hasn't delivered anything of any significance in their first term of government, and they've used
No.
the time that they've had, to be frank, not to do too much, and they've left the door
And
open.
not taking responsibility for anything.
The door open
This is
for
not taking responsibility.
a different conversation. I mean, it was such a wonderful opportunity for them to start talking about how we're going to reorientate the Australian economy for the future and invest in some big ideas on how that's to happen, and talk about population, like I keep banging on about. How big does Australia need to get?
Yeah.
And
But
we that out.
you and I have similar kind of feelings about Labor in general, but you're a little closer, a little biased on this one, I think, because they are disgusting. You give me a bit of chance to say why I think so, right? I mean, disgusting, bro. Albanese's been infrastructure minister, infrastructure this and infrastructure the third, with an economics degree, not one piece of infrastructure spending. Not one. Nothing. In 3 years, not one. We're 30 years behind, not one. As Prime Minister, right? But he's supposedly 20 years as an infrastructure minister or shadow infrastructure, blah, blah, blah. We've got Jim Chalmers, who tries to get people to call him Dr. Chalmers with a political science PhD, the worst treasurer I've ever seen, pressuring the Reserve Bank governor, pressuring the bank, claiming that, trying to run this argument that the corporations, Labor are doing this, the corporations are what's the problem with inflation. It's greedy corporations like Woolworths and Coles, right? Now, maybe that plays well to the young and pretty stupid Green/Labor voters, but anyone who's got a brain is going to think about it, and when they do, which might not be till the election, go, "What do you mean greedy corporations?" You make it as if that's not a constant in the equation, right? In other words, the whole inflation problem is because corporations are always greedy, always. So if you let them get away with putting their prices up, they'll keep doing it, and if you keep paying it, they'll keep doing it, right? And that's why what you're supposed to do is smash your economy with interest rate rises until we cannot spend any money at all, right? And I've had a lot of conversations with people over the years, right? The best, the best solution I've ever heard, multiple people come up together, is if all of us for 3 weeks could stop spending money. Just go, you know what? Everybody in Australia just put it in their pocket and don't spend for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, right? Then you'll solve your inflation. But no one's allowed to spend a dollar, right?
Yeah,
Then
but
the company's going to go broke and all
but
the rest of it.
look, I get inflation has to be minimised, right? It has to be brought to a sustainable level, and it still hasn't reached that point. And the lever that's available to governments via reserve banks is interest rates, right? Because it creates that cost for borrowing money, and takes away other discretionary income from certain people. But there's a whole lot of people to whom this doesn't affect, right? My
Then you've
sense,
got to go harder and deeper.
I
That's
know,
how it works. You can't.
but
You have to go harder and deeper until they stop spending.
my my
Because I
my,
haven't stopped spending.
well, either. But my thing, and I heard this idea, and I don't know who said it, but perhaps we could have had a temporary measure where, or every employee just got paid more super, And so more
You
of
know, all of these measures, right?
income that people would have
Th-
been earning instead of going
No,
to
there's a
go.
fundamental issue with all of this, right? All of it has a huge issue, right? I was following this very closely in the after the '90s. Okay, was it Samuels? He did a whole radio program on all of these things many years ago. Okay, when he exited, and he was not happy the government interfered to say interest rates were higher than someone or not because that was independent. And he said that there's no other way to solve an inflation problem other than raising interest rates. There's no other lever. Now, when you start saying, why don't we, what you're basically saying is, why don't we stop paying people?
Yeah.
Instead of raising interest rates, let's stop paying people. Yeah, right. I'm going to burn your whole bloody parliament down with 20,000 other people. What do you
No,
mean you're not paying us?
get paid. It's
Not
just
going
that
to happen.
you're still you're still going to get paid. It's just
You
that
go, you go tell someone they're not getting paid, bro. It's in the super. No way, no way. The system is very simple. Look at Russia. Look at Russia. The lady,
you know why I don't
Abelina, I
like
think her name is. She got it.
it, Stratus. Let me just finish. The reason I don't like the
Yeah,
idea of raising interest rates is because the money goes to the banks. Whereas if you give that
money
money,
goes to banks anyway.
no, but if you give that money to someone and put it in their super, yes, it's reduced their discretionary spend, but the money goes to them for the future, not to the bank.
Yeah, this is the problem. This is why Australia, as a country, is fucked.
Why?
Beyond fucked. I'll tell you. Because Labor Party have caved in to the needs of their mortgage holder base, and rather than run effective, tried and proven economic policy, are playing games and pie in the sky, all this stupid shit. And you know what's happened? Here's what's happened: a $30 billion deficit this year. That's number one. Number two, $100 billion reduction in projection of our exports over the next 4 years, and they're blaming China for having a deteriorating economy. That's a lie. Again, it's a glut in the steel market. That's why the iron ore is less. Steel prices dropped. Blah blah. Normal market conditions. So we're going forward with a budget that's going to get progressively worse,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
In economic conditions and international relations, which probably be in a kinetic world war in the next 2, 3, 5 years, by the looks of it, right? Which we're already neck deep in, by the way. We've already got assets all over the place, right? And then you've got this pathetic government that is playing like the Democrats rather than having leadership. Do you remember Paul Keating? He took it on the chin. He said, "This is the recession that we had to have,"
yeah,
right? And he won an election with Houston, right? Fighting back on economic policy,
yeah,
right? That's because the only way to solve it is literally to burn the economy to the point where you burn businesses off. The problem in Australia, in my opinion, is there's too many businesses that are just holding on and getting benefits and getting government subsidies. The amount of businesses that are not making money, in my opinion, if you can't turn a profit in 3 years, you're not a fucking business. You're a charity case. You're getting money from the government to keep your lights on. That's
yeah,
the problem here. When they say, "Oh, there's not," it's happening in the building industry. It's happening all throughout the retail industry. There's people that are now entitled to have three houses and a business and a credit card. They're entitled, right? Where the previous generation understood that if the economic conditions were bad, the interest rates could go through the fucking roof until we get hurt. Now they went up what, 2% from zero? What are they now, 4%?
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
still
Look,
low. And
well,
people are like, "How dare you put our interest rates up?"
during that time, interest rates went
That's
up
it.
high.
Australia's gone, mate. There's no way known that you're ever going to see any government with the political balls. They've already hacked up the separation between Reserve Bank and government. They've already destroyed that, right? So how the hell are you going to see? What we're going to talk about is Aboriginal flags. We're going to talk about bullshit. We're going to talk about homeless. We're going to talk about dole bludgers, right? We're not going to talk about the $150 billion in upper class welfare the government gives. We're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about bullshit, and the house prices are going to continue to go up. The interest rates are going to be kept low. And I cannot believe it. I'll finish off with this point. This guy told me, an ex's brother, and we're having a discussion about interest rates. This was about 5 years ago. And I said, there's no way that they're not going to raise interest rates. They're going to have to keep the inflation low. He goes, believe me, this country, they're not going to drop the inflation. They're not raising the interest rates to the point of mortgages breaking. Even though that's the system, they're not going to do it. And I thought he was crazy, right? I thought, how could that be? That's like driving your car backwards. No, that's what we are in Australia.
I'm
So,
afraid that I think you could be right. As harsh as it is, um, you've got to raise interest rates, and they're reluctant to. The Reserve Bank should have raised interest rates a long time ago, and they let them. They left them too low for too long. And to have a
yeah.
situation where prices in Sydney are so out of reach to the average person, let alone most other capital cities, um, is quite ridiculous. So good luck to
Yeah.
whoever's going to try and fix that problem, because I don't see it getting fixed. What I do
And it's
see,
culture. It's become a cultural issue. It's
yeah,
affected the fabric of how this country operates.
what I do see is a very big mistake could happen, and interest rates will fall, and then we're going to have a massive increase in the price of housing,
All
only
right.
for it to,
Let- let-
only for the disaster to
I know. I know.
be future.
I know we wanted to talk about Syria too. So let's like
Yeah,
I can segue it right
yeah,
on what you just said. I'll segue it.
yeah. Let's go.
Here's what you just said freaks me out. Right. Okay. So we're in December. I know there's talk about somehow getting an interest rate lower for the election. Okay. So the animal spirits of all these landholders go, beauty. I knew they were weak as piss. I knew the government will not reduce this inflation. They will not do it. Bang, and you get even higher house right price, and then inflation ticks up. And then Syria is a very big deal. Syria is a huge deal, but it's not a big deal because of its components. The sum of its parts are a big deal, right? Some of its parts are a big deal. And Putin only yesterday he said straight out he gave a timeline for a war with NATO. You have a freaking timeline. He's never done that. Then you've got that existing timeline. China versus USA is the same freaking timeline, 2030s, right? So this muppetry that we have in Australia is floating along, making decisions in a bubble, but that bubble is in a world stage, and that inflation's already caused by world events. It's not caused by labor spending or liberal COVID. Really, to me, it is caused by a conscious decision by the Americans to put a bomb in the system, literally, and blow apart the relationships with Russian banks, Chinese banks, Middle East, and Europe, all of that. They did that on purpose. And the reason I think they did it is because following this for many years, the one thing that was said, they couldn't go to war with China because of this coupling, right? So they've gone, okay, let's decouple then. Now we can. Do you know what I mean? Like it's all step by step, and then to see Syria and to watch what happened there, and then to see Russia how they operated
Yeah,
in Syria because that's usually their sphere of influence,
yeah,
right? They had that under control. See where Turkey is, then go okay. What fucking this is on? This is stepped up to the next level, and so we're going to cop an inflation spike into the next year, and then they're going to have to drop the interest rate. The interest rates will only have to go up by 0.5%, and everyone's gone anyway. You know,
yeah. Look, they're
so
going to have to the interest rates now to avoid a bigger disaster, I think, in the future. You want to be giving signals to people that prices of houses is not going to go up. They've got to stagnate and perhaps stay where they are for a long period of time. The idea that these houses should be going up even more is quite fanciful.
but they will.
I think they will. I
They
think that
will.
no
Of
political
course
will.
they will. When you're subsidising it, you're subsidising it. Every taxpayer, GST pays everybody, is subsidising these numbers
Yeah,
because all of those tax credits and everything else are part of that calculation of to buy another one, to borrow more money. Done. You
yeah,
know, and I mean, I don't care too much about it because I don't have skin in the game. I just look at it as we've seen the worst government in history, and it's going to be replaced by the even worse government. Like, don't get me twisted. I don't the bias on one side or the other. I'm saying that's the pool we have, right? Because all the quality's gone. You know, Kevin Rudd was quality. Turnbull was quality. There was a lot of quality in the Liberals. There was a lot of quality in the Labor, and they've just gone. And what's left is these ideologues and also rans that finally got their shot. And you know,
Well,
Jim Chalmers is not a treasurer
there's a
compared
lot
to say Tim Pallas.
there's a lot of good people that have left the state Labor government as well. So I'm not sure who's
Yeah.
left there either. So look, it's a tough place to be, I think, in politics right now, and we've got who we've got. We'll see what they come up with, but I'm not holding my breath. No population policy. I'm going to repeat it. No population policy. They got. Remember my previous comments about a sustainable Australian defence industry, so that we're completely self-sufficient. So a self-sufficient defence industry posture, so that we don't rely on others for our defence. We need a population policy to back up the reason why we need how much defence we need, and then we also need a view on what we're going to make, and who we're going to employ, and then where we're all going to live, and how it's all going to be sustainable. So lots of massive conversations need to be had, but I don't see these on the radar. And then
Well,
my big,
I see them.
yeah, well, you see
I see them,
my
but
big
it
bug,
requires.
my big bugbear is a lack of investment in education and teaching, and as you know, and I know, right, the biggest difference that can be made to a child's life is the quality of the teacher in front of them, right? Other than their parents and maybe some key adults in their lives, the next most important person for a child in their development is the teacher. And if you've got quality teachers
Mate,
instructing children, it makes the biggest difference. Yet here we are.
I
We
think
we don't even rate teachers anymore. We don't pay them enough. We don't support them enough, and we're
no.
certainly not encouraging smart people to become teachers. And here we are. We've got a teacher crisis. We've got
Yeah.
kids not learning. What sort of place are we going to be, mate?
What sort of place it's going to be is a place that you and I don't want to be in. Everybody's going to leave that can. They're going to go to other countries. That's what's going to happen. It's a brain drain. It happens at other places. Happened in Greece. It happened in a lot of places. And people go, you know what? For me, I'm literally looking at the US going, if Trump just does a 5%, if he could just move the needle like that, just a little bit, I'm going to look at immigrating over there because it's all happening there. So if he can just move the little bit the needle to change a few policies to because like in terms of the war and peace aspect of it, I think it'll all be done and dusted in the next 3-4 years. I think it'll be over. But it's more around the sort of what makes America great is those business opportunities,
Mm.
and they like to make things and they like to be creative and they're great creative economy. So if you're in the writing space, if you're in the filmmaking or script writing, it's such a great market. It's such a great economy for it. I had to do papers on this. And Australia's just you know. Me and my brother laugh about it. People go, oh, Australia's the best country. What are you talking about? Compared to what country? You mustn't have been to too many countries. Like, I think geographically it's amazing. I love it. I travel it all the time. But most people in this country don't know what's in their backyard. So they go to Bali, mate,
No.
that's usually what...
Do we think
I think
Syria
we have
is?
a higher ideal of...
I was just going to say.
I was just going to say, I think...
There you go.
Go on.
No, I was just going to mention
Go
Syria.
on.
Do we think it's going to be a yeah? Do we think it's going to be a democracy, or do we think it's going to be something else?
Wait, what do you
Sy-
mean?
Syria.
What do you mean a democracy? Oh, come on, Andrew. You're not buying that whole democracy
I,
autocracy.
s-
None of us are
I,
democracies, man.
I, s-
We're in a war. Do you remember voting for it? We're sending billions and men over there to fight, plain clothed, as volunteers, right? Volunteers, but they're in the army a week before that, right? Did you vote for that?
yeah,
There's
look,
no democracy, man. That's just what we
I,
tell ourselves.
I felt funny saying it. Do we think the Americans are going to have an influence in Syria, or do we think the Russians are going to have an influence in Syria?
No, I mean let's be frank about it, okay? Because the level of misinformation that we get from MI6, CIA, and the mainstream media is disgusting.
It sounds to
And
me
what's
Russians
happened is
are going to sort of work together on this one, don't you think?
no. I mean that's another story. I want to get to that, but I want to say that the reason today people like myself can get better information is there's whole like organic communities have sprung up around war. One of them is the mapping community, so they literally map every movement of every piece of every unit, and they collaborate. So the leading one for me is Military Summary Channel, but there's a lot of them. There's Defense Policy Asia, does a lot of Asian ones. So we get them. Then we have independent journalists,
Yeah.
right? Who all the way to the best is Patrick Lancaster, because he's actually a little insane, goes in the war zones in Ukraine. But then you also have sidelined experts, which is the best. So Professor Mersheimer is a great one. Jeffrey Sachs is another. There's a lot of them. Ritter, there's heaps of them. There's maybe 30 of them, right? And they're
Mm.
generally in their 70s or 60s, 70s. And they're literally persona non grata on CNN. You can't have them on, right? Because they don't run the line. And then you have sort of people that will talk at the UN and that. And then there's all sorts of independent journalists from heaps of them. So, and they're all they have their bias. Everyone has a bias, but you also know when things are true, because there's sort of like multiple sources are saying the same things and from different angles, right?
Yeah.
So that's the first. So they can't lie to us like they did in Iraq, the second Iraq war. They can't lie to us like they did in Afghanistan. They can't lie to us the same way. And what
No.
also is the power. So Tucker Carlson, for example, and Donald Trump's sons, and especially his youngest son, they watch the same things I'm watching, right? So they go,
Yeah.
wait a minute, is that what's really happening? So there's a whole, and then what you then see
Whole
is there's
ecosystem,
tired
the whole
propagandists.
yeah, there's a whole ecosystem of better information, and it's about
Yeah.
making sure the right information is being published, spoken about, talked about.
But it's not on the mainstream media. So you
No,
won't see it in ABC News, you won't see it on Channel 7, Channel 9, BBC. You will not see it. So if you watch legacy stuff, you will literally believe we're in a war against this evil despots who are taking over democracies, and we have to fight. My children don't believe that,
no,
a kindergarten kid wouldn't believe that. But you've got voters, boomers that'll argue with you. Like they'll argue with you. Don't you know that Russia's a dictator? No, that's not a dictatorship. Who told you it was a dictatorship? It's not a dictatorship. That's nonsense. It's a different system to our system, but it's not a dictatorship. So that's the first thing. So they can't lie the same. So the way the US tends to do it, and the way that Russia does it, and the way that China do it are different,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
not to say that Russia isn't doesn't lie, doesn't do their own version of propaganda. I just won't promote the view of like I tend to argue with people if they think that Russia's bad. I will never say a thing to them about why Russia's bad. I'll point out every reason why we're bad until I can see they've woken up or they're not worth talking to, right? Because you can't even talk about what the other side's like until you work out what your own side's like. It's crazy, right? Until you work out how we're playing the game, then you can start to work out how they're playing the game. And once you get there, then you see Syria.
Well, it's interesting because before this whole thing happened in Syria, you almost knew that something was up like months ago. That was
Yeah.
the next place where the Americans were going to want to show the Russians that they didn't have the same level of influence as they might have thought, right? And so this play in Syria was as much about, I think, the Americans telling the Russians, don't think that you can don't think you can control what you think you can, because if we want to, we can
Yeah.
also overturn governments that you are controlling. And so I think it's a big message.
Well, what you just said there was one of those things that it's spot on and it's very deep to it. There's a lot to it, right?
Yeah.
I could literally talk your ear off around what you just said as a prompt, honestly, because I've immersed myself in it. And most people don't understand. They think, "Oh, you're full of crap." No, I wrote that initial novel, right? Back in 20, whatever it was.
Yeah.
I just turned 40. It was
Yeah.
6 years ago. And part of that was intensely researching and role playing how World War Three would pan out. Like who's got what weapons, what's the deals, who's friends with who, and just by doing that research, I didn't know what was going to happen, and I had to pull that piece off the shelf because it was wrong in parts. I was wrong about Europe, so I already had a lot of information to go. Wait, you're lying. It was about our side. Wait a minute, you're lying. That's not real at all.
Mm.
For example, anything to do with India, India's not on our team at all. End of story. They're Russian. They're Russia's ally. They're Russia's main ally. Now, they're not going to be allies in UN, they're just going to abstain. But every weapon pretty much that they use that's important is from Russia, which means when you're that close, you have to be close with that country because they can shut your military down. No more parts. Done.
Yeah.
You can't move. So that's the level, right? But anyway, to go with what you said, what worries me is this. Okay, now I just challenge me if you don't like what I'll say is a fact, but if you don't like anything I'm going to say in the next minute, right?
Mm.
So there's the terrorist group HNI. It doesn't matter their name. They're jihadists. They're an offshoot of Al Qaeda, and they've been living inside of this Idlib province, and they've been pumping people more and more in, and US have been pumping more weapons into them. They pin it on Turkey because they route it through Turkey, but Turkey doesn't do anything without the US accepting it in
Yeah.
this context, right?
Yeah.
Right. So they've armed this group of absolute jihadis. Now, to the level, I've seen footage of it. Special forces have trained other special forces. They've given them thermal equipment so they can see in the dark, right? They've armed 30,000 of them, and then they've unleashed them on Aleppo. Now, one of the I know it's crazy. So one of an analyst, Scott Ritter, his view was judging all the things he could pick, and he's a hardcore expert, right, military man. He thought that went faster than everybody thought. His instinct is they achieved more gains than what America was ready for because they didn't have a government ready, they didn't have anything ready, right? So the Russians have cracked the shits and they've said the following, and here's a hint of how the Russians operate. They said, first of all, we did a deal with you, Turkey, that you would clear out Idlib. That's a red line. You didn't clear out Idlib. Why? Okay, but that was 2 years ago, dickhead. Now you're complaining. Do you know what I mean? Now they're
Yeah.
complaining that there's a hotbed of terrorism. Well, why didn't you clear it out? Because you've got air bases, you've got to bomb them, clear them out, right? So they kind of see this card coming down the pipe. This is how Russia operates. And they know they're going to have something on Turkey and something on the US. So they just let it happen. And then when it happens, they go, hey, you did this and you did this and you did this. And everyone goes, how evil's America, right? Okay, but you're playing a game here. I see it now, right? And so you see now they've got this
So
really nasty groups.
am I right? The Russians are taking this stuff out now. Are they evacuating?
No, what it is, if you look at the Syrian map, like along the coast up north are air bases,
Yeah.
right? Russian air bases. Along this coast is a special forces and whatever else base around the oil fields of the US. They've never left. They should have occupied it, right? From there, they actually supported this incursion, right? So if you give them the benefit of the doubt that the country collapsed, the fighters were fighting them, but there's also they weren't getting paid, man. The whole country had gone economic turmoil. They weren't getting paid. No one's fighting, highly armed. Oh, we saw it in Afghanistan. And nobody's going to stand up to a Mujahideen army, 30,000 strong, that's going to butcher everyone. because they're not just going to fight you. They're going to rape your wife. They're going to butcher you. They're going to hang people from. These are the worst of the worst that we've been watching. Now, America has made it very clear that they were happy to use them as a tool to geopolitically help Israel. So this is more about Israel. This was supposed to happen. The information I heard through Rita on his channel, speaking with Judge Neapolitano, he's the number one for me, Judge Neapolitano. He's a judge, old judge from America, you know, gospel. Whatever he says is gospel. Whatever he puts on, well vetted. Anyway, this apparently was supposed to happen in March as a coordinated effort with a counter-offensive from Ukraine versus Russia and bang these guys down at the same time, right? To sort of make a bit of a whatever, big media thing more than anything. But then the Netanyahu's been losing. So the stories he wanted that brought forward so that they would attack them and then he could attack Syria and then sort of divert from the losses that they were having. And now the analysts are saying, all right, Israel went from losing badly to winning like that because now they've cut off Hezbollah from Iran, the land bridge that can't resupply them. They've smashed Syria and it's gone. Guys ran to Moscow,
Yeah.
Which should tell you everything, right? The Russians haven't left, but it's not clear whether they're going to have to leave or not. They've got a lease there for 50 years. They've got a naval base, air bases, but they may just go, no, we have to give up the territory. So it's kind of that what might happen, and probably what the Americans and the Turks want is to kick Russia out of Syria altogether. Because if you look at the map, they've got a naval base on the Mediterranean, right? So if I was in the NATO camp, if you're in the NATO camp, it's right on the border of Cyprus. It's really close to Greece, which is
Right right
a
next
red line.
to
Greece is a red line. You cannot touch Greece. You can't go anywhere near there. So, and
yeah.
that goes back to Churchill, right? Churchill said to Stalin, "We cannot lose the Mediterranean again. That's it." So, our side cannot have probably in a situation where Turkey's a piece of crap. No offense, Turkey, but they swap sides like this and that and this and that and this and that. They hop between the beds all the time. Well, they're the ones that have the power to allow Russia to take ships back through the Dardanelles and resupply and come back out into the Mediterranean. So if I'm America, I don't want nothing to do with Turkey in my plans because you can't trust them, right? They keep swapping.
No,
They've
no.
got S400s and
The
S35s.
Americans will trust the Turks. The Turks are going to be there for them, no doubt. No, I don't think that's ever going to be an issue from my perspective.
Well,
But
they haven't been though. They haven't been. They haven't been so far.
but
Like
it's
they've got S400s,
no, but
so
yeah,
they've already broken
it
rules.
seems like they're not. They talk that talk, but in reality, you got to see what they do, and they're doing what they're doing. So I think that's interesting.
Well,
I
the
don't.
reality is that Turkey's playing a dangerous game, right? Because if they keep playing the way they've been playing, and this is probably why they've played ball, but they also want to kill Kurds, of course, which are in the north and they're fighting like tooth and nail. Is that obviously US has the power to take them out, So, and the US would take Turkey out, absolutely, and Russia wouldn't care.
Yeah, but the Turks
Russia just go, bad luck
the,
for you,
the Turks need the Europeans and the Americans not to sort of have an issue with the other things that Turkey's doing, right? So
which they don't. They couldn't care less.
they don't, but if they do change their mind for whatever reason, then Turkey might have an issue. So what I think is interesting is that I think the Russians and the Americans are chatting about the scenario in Syria because there's a bigger problem at the moment, and that is they don't know where certain weapons are, especially
Yeah.
biological and chemical ones. And I think they're working together to make sure at least they close off that issue
Well,
together.
I just on that, so that guy Scott Ritter, who was banned a lot, but he's still everybody puts him on his channels. He is the chief weapons inspector of the UN, right? Back in the Iraq, that whole debacle, he specifically attacked Biden and others were saying there's nothing there. And he made the point that there wasn't any chemical weapons in Syria because they haven't deployed Delta Force to go and take them. He said, if there were chemical weapons and these terrorists are running around, believe me, there's dudes in suits, you know, black frogmen just shooting everyone, taking it and getting out of there. The issue was more the stockpile of weapons that were provided to them, and that the Syrians had themselves already from the Russians, and then
Yeah,
the Turks via the Americans are getting more, and then to say, wait, they're in control of the government. Shit, there's long range missiles here. There's Scud missiles here. There's things from Russia that can shoot into Israel from here, and it seems to me, although they're not admitting it, that they're all doing sorties at the same time. US is doing sorties into Syria, bombing from the air. Why? There's no war. It's done. Russia's doing the same. What he's bombing, and Israel's been doing the same. So I really think that for this they're cooperating. But who's going to control the airspace? Because up until the Assad left, that was the big moment when I realized the US were in trouble. Was, I think, in 2012. You can look up the exact dates. Close to that is the Russians declared a no-fly zone over all of Syria.
yeah,
What they say is that the way they do it. They say any flying plane is subject to being shot down as if they're a military threat. And they basically say, if you put a plane in the sky, we're going to shoot it down. And the Americans backed off. They said, we'll fly where we want, and they flew the other way.
Not when I was Prime Minister, but if I'd been in the Parliament when the Soviet Union ended, I would have fiercely tried to establish an independent Australian policy. I would have wanted to keep an alliance with the United States. But I would not have wanted the circumstances in which, if they go to war in the Western Pacific, it de facto represents a declaration of war for and on behalf of Australia, just as much as the declaration of the British in relation to the First World War tied Australia to a most terrible slaughterhouse in the history of mankind.